Welcome to Ability Assistance. My name is Phyllis Jones, Chair of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
My name is Stacey Leibowitz, and I am the Secretary of the North Andover Commission on Ability Assistance.
Our guest today is Brad Howell, President and CEO of Waystone Health and Human Services. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
No, it's our pleasure. The first question we always ask is, how did you get involved in this industry, in the industry of wanting to help people who might need a little bit assistance?
Yeah, it's a good question. Takes me back. I think I have always been oriented towards people, and when I picked a course in college, a direction to go in, it was towards psychology with the intent of helping somebody in some fashion, some mode. And then I found myself working in the field of disabilities and have been in that my whole career.
That's great.
That's great.
So now you are you're CEO of Waystone, and used to be Fidelity House, if I remember correctly. And tell us, just I guess to start in a general fashion, what does Waystone do? I know you're based in Lawrence and Haverhill. What are the services that you provide?
Yeah, and just to back up a second, that about 5 years ago, Career Resources in Haverhill merged with Fidelity House. So that was in January of 2019. And over about 2 years ago, we rebranded as Waystone Health and Human Services. So two similar agencies came together to form what we are now today. So we
and you also provide services to North Andover.
Right.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, we do. We provide a wide range of services, really in the northeast of Massachusetts, with a concentration in the Merrimack Valley area. And we provide services for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, autism, brain injury, and a lot of other folks with varying disabilities. And those services range from living in the community in 24/7 supervised settings to working with children and families from ages 3 years old and up. We have day programs, employment programs, all kinds of different community living arrangements, so people can be in settings and supported based on what they need and what they would like.
Let's break it down by age, because 3 till date of passing
Yes.
Is a long time, and hopefully it's an extremely long time. So let's talk about services that you might offer for, let's say, the elementary school, preschool age, 3 through about 10, I think that would be at this point, right?
Yes, right. And most of the children and family that we serve are a little bit older than 3 years old. Occasionally we get somebody that young. But those services include working with families and what their school needs might be for their child, or there's other resources in the community that the family needs to connect to. So kind of a service navigation, but also we can get involved with providing the family and the child with behavioral supports if there's concerns or issues happening in the home.
So what type of, let's break it down even further.
Okay.
The services.
Because we're talking to each other and we might understand, but we need to remember that our audience may not realize it. So let's break it down a little bit further. When you're talking about working with the school, are we talking about developing an IEP, or are we talking about once an IEP is developed, you getting involved and saying, okay, these services are needed, the town doesn't have the resources, we know how to get them?
Yeah, it's really working with the family to understand the process, to help them advocate. So it could be around education, around what an IEP is and information, what services should be available to their child, and then if needed, we can support the person in the family and the child in helping meet with the team or help develop the IEP with them. But usually we're supporting the family and advocating, because it's a lifelong, journey through the school system and beyond.
Speaking as a parent who's,
Right.
who's currently going through it and has been going through it since my son was about 3-4 years old, I completely
Right.
understand.
So we want to partner with whoever we're serving
Right.
and provide them the skills and tools they need so they can advocate for
Right.
themselves as best as possible.
But
So
you're not the advocate.
not necessarily. I mean, we can play that role, but we are not the advocate.
You're basically educating the family.
Yes.
And offering them tools, basically, so they can help themselves. That's what it kind of sounds like.
That is
Yes.
our focus,
And
yes.
I guess to add to that question, because I know we were talking about up to about age 10, 11, when you're talking about IEPs, that also, as the child gets into the teen years, you're talking about transition planning. Are you involved with that as well?
Yes, yeah, we are. Transition planning is a big point of discussion all the time. And so as someone starting to graduate from high school or reach age 22 and they age out of the school system, there's a lot of preparation that ideally people think about and that we help families plan for, because you're going from a school system that's entitlement to an
Right.
adult disability system that is eligibility based.
Exactly.
And
Okay.
not everybody is understanding that transition or has the information necessary to understand what happens at that point.
So are we talking about, again, pulling it back a little bit, we've talked about elementary school, then we've got those 3 years that I don't think any human being on the planet ever wants to relive again.
Middle school.
Right.
Yes,
The
6th,
nightmare of.
7th, and 8th grade. Oh, even thinking about it, I get chills.
Yeah. But that also is when transition really starts. Depending on the state, it can be as young as 14, it can be as old as 16, but between that time, there's middle school, and then you're getting into that high school. With Waystone, when does that discussion with families actually start? Because again, to Phyllis's point that you're breaking it down further, what does that look like when you're, making that, transition, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, but that shift in discussion and in education? When do you start prepping parents so they're not in shock that this is coming?
Right, and it varies,
Yeah.
I would say. The conversation could start at any time, but there's a point in time, depending on what's happening with the family and the child and the intensity of
Yeah.
whatever's happening at the time, that may be the main focus, rather than at 14 talking about what's going to happen in 5-6 years,
Right.
depending on the person's progress. What we did, I think it was about 3 years ago, the pandemic kind of has warped some time.
Yes,
We'll be addressing that too.
yes.
But our main funding source, Department of Developmental Services through the state, we created 2 positions that were we call it turning 22 years old, coordinators, to help people focus on this particular issue. So that's a relatively new service that we're offering, so that folks that are families and folks that are approaching that age are really focused on that transition plan. So they may be visiting programs that we also offer, but wherever other organizations in the area may be offering as well, to get an idea of what's it like to go to a rehabilitation program or a community-based day support program or an employment program. What services are out there? And there are certainly a lot of information that's available, and that's one of the reasons that actually the 2 organizations merged 5 years ago, was to be able to provide a continuum of services for people, so that we had the family support services, and then if people chose to stay with us, they could move into day programs as well. So we had the whole continuum and could, show families what we were doing and help people plan for the future.
Now, for people who have children at any age in the spectrum, whether it be kindergarten through graduation, up to age 22, which I know that sometimes people are graduating, some people are just completing high school with a completion certificate. One of the things I can tell you as a parent who has a child who's out of district, because our IEP got to that point.
Mm-hmm.
The schools at the special ed schools who deal with these kids who aren't in the district anymore physically, they don't offer after-school programs, they don't offer sports programs,
Right.
they don't offer after-school clubs. What, if anything, do you offer that these parents can point to and say, okay, there's no baseball team that you could be a part of, for example, because although the home school district has to allow it, you still have to get the child there, and by the time they get home. And so what sort of supports do you offer those children to be able to feel as though they're having that whole growing up experience if they choose to?
Right. Through our family support services, we do offer recreational get-togethers.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's dinners out once a month, where if the parent needs to be there as well, they're in a separate area so that the younger folks can dine together without, mom and dad or mom or dad or whoever.
Screaming, don't you know how to use a fork?
Because it's the typical
Things that we
teen.
may do, right?
Yes.
Typical teen.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
So we do offer that. There's also, we also have funding that we provide families for recreation of their choosing. So that might not be in a group, but that may be if you want to take your family to Canopy Lake and have fun. And there's also outings that we do as a group to places like Canopy Lake or other recreational events that happen. So it's not a daily thing. It's not a club. It's not a league like a baseball league or soccer, but we do offer mostly social and recreational opportunities. And maybe when I come back on the show at some point, we were hoping in the next year or so we were going to expand those services. That's some things are in the works that
would be
aren't 100%
fantastic.
yet, but we are certainly looking to do that because the need is, and it's not just for school-age kids.
Correct.
It's for folks that are young adults
Right.
that are, maybe even more isolated because they're no longer going to school.
Right.
They're out of the school system, and there's what do I join? What's the club? What do I do?
Right.
So we are addressing that need as well for folks that may also not want to go to a traditional day program, and having more of a club type of situation where you can go when you want to go, socialize, and you choose what you want to do.
And I think that kind of is a good segue into discussing how things went during the pandemic, because I think so much, you refer to it as it's the time before and then the time after, and how things have changed.
Right.
How did Waystone pivot during that time, and how has that changed what you do now?
Yeah.
And what are some of the issues that maybe some of the positive, I always want to focus on the positive, what were some of those outcomes, but also what are some of the challenges as an organization supporting people with different abilities? How has that changed things, and how are you addressing those challenges?
Small little question.
Yeah. But I think industry-wide.
We'll help you break it down a little bit.
It's industry-wide, I think that is,
Yeah.
a concern. Actually, just in general, it's a concern.
In general, yeah.
So,
The pandemic was, it was all hands on deck all the time. And it was, when I've talked to people about this, it was, here's our normal course of business.
yeah.
Throw that playbook out.
Yes.
And how do we all collectively manage through the pandemic that was ever changing?
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
the guidelines and the messaging from the state, because we're mostly state funded and we have regulatory obligations, obviously, and some of those regulatory obligations we had to suspend.
Yep.
Just, we're doing things virtually.
Mhm.
The resources that we usually had in place weren't there. People weren't there. And
People were afraid.
Yeah.
people were afraid,
Yeah.
and we have 31, at the time we had 29 group homes. And those don't close.
Right.
They cannot close, right?
24 hours.
It's people's homes.
Yeah.
So we had to manage our staffing, who were also dealing with their families and their own well-being, and not wanting to bring COVID into their home, but yet we need staff at people's homes. So we had to manage that flow of who went into what home.
And a lot of people don't realize you have state regulations that has a ratio.
Right.
Correct.
1 to, what
Right.
is the current ratio right now?
Well, it depends on,
Right.
on the home and the needs of the
Yeah.
folks in the
Okay.
homes. So
Yeah.
usually we always had 2 staff on 24/7.
Mhm.
And that is what we did our best to maintain.
And you're still having a hard time maintaining that ratio. Are you still finding yourselves dealing with a lack of ability of just plain old staffing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're going from COVID crisis to staffing crisis right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
And it's, yes, and we, and I know across our economy, across businesses, finding enough employees has been a challenge, especially right after COVID and during COVID. The human services industry had that crisis pre-pandemic.
Yes.
It was just not amplified as much,
Right.
although we tried. So yes, we have a very difficult time hiring for our direct support professionals. And whether it's certainly wages come into play, but also who's coming into this field. So I hope shows like what we're doing today can show how needed and how fulfilling a career is in human services. And flashing back to the very first question that you asked me, why did I get into this field? Well, what do you do with your life?
Right.
How do you make other lives better?
When you
And-
look back 50 years, 60
Yeah.
years,
Right,
or
What
more.
was your impact?
Yeah.
right.
And why were you here? And I think the same is true for Phyllis and myself. Phyllis and her son. I have a younger sister. There are reasons why we do what we do.
And how we do it.
Right.
And then you've got
Yes.
me, who's also a lawyer. Shh, we're not all bad. But learning and seeing different aspects. I'm very fortunate because I've been able to self-teach myself because of my legal background.
Right.
But I know other parents are not in that situation, and I can't tell you how many times Stacey's heard it remotely. I'm screaming at the top of my lungs in the house, I've accomplished X. For example, I've accomplished an IEP where my kid is now sent out of district, something that a lot of parents, get a lot of gray hairs over and don't know how to do. But I then start screaming, not so much because of what I had to go through to get X, whatever X is. But then I sit back and go, people who might, have a language barrier, people who might have a time barrier, people who might have an education barrier, people just trying to live their lives and deal. And I'm like, I'm able to do it because of my background.
Right.
What do other people have to do in order to
Right.
get there?
And I think what that speaks to me about is kind of connecting back to the question about COVID and what's changed, and everything has the opportunity to change.
Yeah.
And I think what COVID presented an opportunity for me is how do I lead an organization in a way that can continue to change and not in ways that one might not have thought.
Right.
So to really kind of challenge the boundaries of what and how mostly how we were doing it, and within the constructs of what we were doing. As I mentioned, state funding is mostly what supports us. Well, with that comes regulations. With that comes, here's a contract for day programs. This is what your deliverables are. And during COVID, those deliverables weren't possible.
Right, they went out the window.
But the essence of what we're doing is supporting somebody. How do we do that? So we did remote court supports. We offered groups remotely. We sent activities and information home, so somebody could work on that while we did the remote. You know, kind of mirroring what schools did to an extent, on a very, very small scale.
Right, right.
But the point for me was, we can do things differently, and they can be better. And COVID allowed us to play with that.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
And so what has stayed for me is that continuously challenging, how can we do this differently that would result in better outcomes? What else can we be doing? How can we do it more creatively? And to be less concerned that, that it's staying within the rules, within the lines. Not that I'm a rule breaker, not that we're not going to be
But being
compliant with
creative.
regulations,
Being creative about it.
but
I
being
think.
creative
Yeah.
about it. And I think that has led us to be more innovative and to see what the possibilities are.
So, oh, I'm sorry. I just have a twofold question, because I had worked for an organization during that time as well, and having to shift to virtual. So I kind of have a two-pronged question around that, or two-part question: going virtual, going remote, and probably still having some pieces that may be virtual here and there, you know.
Right.
What was it like for the people served? What were the outcomes around that? Because I know from my experience, some individuals that we served really had better outcomes. They actually enjoyed the virtual world.
Yeah.
And also, how was it for parents? How did parents, you know, and how did you support parents, you know, during that time as well? Because I'm sure it was difficult for them.
Yeah, yeah. Picking up on the parents piece, like through our Children and Family Services, we did offer remote support. And I think what came out of that was that parents were more easy. It made it more easy for parents to say, hey, I was in a group with Stacey and you, and I really connected with what you were saying. Now I can just connect with you over Zoom whenever.
Yeah.
You know, and making those connections, whereas, you know, before you had to physically be in the same room together, and that just didn't happen that often. And now you could be in different communities, and you could have connected, just like what's happened across, you know,
It makes
our
it easier to
society.
connect
Easier.
with somebody
Make it easier,
than
right?
what have you.
It makes it real.
Right.
And the question I was going to ask is, where you get most of your funding through DDS.
Yes.
If somebody does not get DDS services, do you have to turn them away, or are they able to get services even though they themselves don't have DDS services?
So most of our funding comes from Department of Developmental Services. We also have 2 programs that are funded through Mass Health. And then we do a lot of work with the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission, soon to be a different name.
Yes.
Yes. Massability.
Massability,
yes.
which I learned recently that they can't quite call themselves Massability
It's
until
a process of
a process,
legislation again.
which you guys were talking about.
We're waiting on, and should hopefully be coming through in January. But with everything, like even our title change, that's a process of legislation. Everything's embedded in that
And I
respect.
wonder whether or not somebody tipped off the
Yeah.
governor about ours being changed.
Who knows? But I think it's the whole idea of becoming more inclusive
Yes.
with the
yes,
name.
Definitely.
So, but obviously, MRC, it would be great, you know, kind of adding to Phyllis's question, to break down which programs and I know I understand that, but for our audience, which programs are funded by which entity, because to Phyllis's point about being eligible for funding, you turn 22, it's sort of, we always call it falling off a cliff, because suddenly you have to be eligible. And you want to plan that, but somebody may not be eligible for DDS. Which programs
and
fund
then
that?
whether or not
Right.
parents have the legal ability, because they've done what needs to be done
Right.
back when the child was 18, to be able to say, we need you in a group home, or we need
Right.
you, so, you know, to participate in these types of programs.
Right, but also knowing on top of that, which programs are out there that they could become eligible for. So breaking down, like your day have program, who funds that, who funds the different employment programs.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. You did ask I felt a really important question about how the people we served receive
Yes.
the remote and services that were happening during COVID. And I think it was mixed, honestly.
Yeah.
I think people who could participate through a screen did and enjoyed that. And I think some people who preferred being able to self-control whether they were seen or not seen, like, click off the video, or click off the sound.
Yeah.
So that stimulation they could control versus being in a room and
Right.
they couldn't. So I think there were some people who appreciated that piece. And I think that, like the rest of the community, some people chose to retire
Right.
early.
Right.
Like, yeah, I'm done. You know,
Right.
or
And we
just
found
work-
that throughout all
Yes.
industries.
Yeah,
Yes.
or I really like this remote stuff, and we see,
Yeah.
even my agency, there's more remote work than there was before. Not in all positions, but in some.
Right.
So I think we saw some people receiving services who said, I don't really want to go back to the day program or to whatever I was doing, or I don't want to go back every day.
Right.
And so that has was incentive for us to say, well, how do we better serve you now?
Right.
And that's what's kind of happening across the state, along with state funding agencies saying, we're hearing from families and people that
Yeah.
maybe we need to come up with some alternatives to the programs that we have been providing. And that's where the innovation is coming from,
Right.
which is great.
Now, you touched upon, and we're going to be having to wrap up soon.
Yes.
But you did touch upon employment opportunities for people who need assistance. I
Yes.
hope we can bring you back on, because there's a huge amount of population out there who want to work or who can work, who might need additional assistance.
Right.
And the prospective employers don't realize that they can hire these people and they get some assistance.
Exactly.
So when we're done, we're going to talk about putting you back on just to talk about that, because I'm sure that went off in somebody's antenna.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a critical point, because you offer so many services, and the unemployment rate across the nation for people with disabilities is 70% plus.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for that, especially post-COVID.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Which, by the way, I don't have for anybody
Right.
who's questioning it.
But it's just to, again, to wrap up, because we have to, I wanted to go back to the question about the funding sources so people know. But let's start with employment. Who are your funding sources? Because, again, somebody may not qualify for DDS, but they may qualify for Mass Rehab, which is MRC. So if you can
Right, right.
elaborate.
Sure. So overall, we serve about 1,900 people every year. About 1,100 in our children and family services, which is funded through Department of Developmental Services.
Right.
And there's a variety of different services under that, but that's all DDS, to use
Right.
acronyms.
Right.
Department of Developmental Services. Our vocational and employment services are funded both from DDS and Mass Rehab
Right.
Commission. And within the Mass Rehab Commission, there's a few different programs. One is for youth that are still in school, that we
Yes.
help them think about, get ready for, resume writing for jobs. We also have a smaller Veterans with Disabilities employment program as well. And then our Mass Health funded programs are rehabilitation, which is usually for people with more medical and cognitive involvement,
Right.
and then adult foster care, which is more of a placement program in someone. If you have a child with that meets the criteria, you can get a stipend every month to support that person.
Okay, well, we're getting yelled at from off screen that we have to wrap this up. It just seems as though there's so much more to
Right.
talk about. So I'm going to
Amazing
invite you to
information.
please come back again
Sure.
soon, so that we can get those services, and the understanding of those services out there, because I think that there's such a need.
Yeah.
I'm still always learning.
I'm always learning. And I work in the field, and I'm
Yeah.
always learning something new about it. So what we've discussed today has been so pertinent,
Yes.
and
It
we
seems
appreciate.
like it's tip of the iceberg.
Yes. So
Lots to talk
we
about. Thank you.
So we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, Brad, and we will definitely be inviting you to come back soon.
Great.
And talk about more of
So-
your
Great.
services.
Well, thank you.
You can call Waystone Health and Human Services They're located in Lawrence, and their telephone number is 978-685-9471. And you can also learn more about them and the programs that they offer at waystonehhs.org. If you're looking for any Commonwealth government office, simply visit mass.gov and search for the office you're looking for, because you've heard a lot of acronyms today.
And we want to thank our crew this month. From GLTS, Alex Santiago, also GLTS alum John Kafori, and from North Shore Academy, Zachary Jones, and from Curry College, our amazing floor manager, Carly Jones.
We will have 2 special tapings in January. One, Congressman Seth Moulton will be joining us remotely, and the other taping will be the Institute for Human-Centered Design. We have confirmed also in May, State Representative Adrian Ramos will be joining us. We still have commitments from other several guests, and we're looking on securing those dates as soon as possible. And as always, we're consistently looking for new topics to explore here at Ability Assistance. We would truly love to know what topics you want more information about. If there's any specific topic you would like more to learn about, please email me directly at pjones@northandoverma.gov or call me at 978-494-0136. In addition to watching through your cable station, you can catch all of our programming on demand through YouTube, the Cablecast app through Roku and Apple TV, the North Andover CAM website, and via podcast on Podbean. From all of us on Ability Assistance, thank you. Happy holidays, Happy New Year. See you next year.
Take care.
Yes.